The following is rated not safe for work. It contains strong language, adult situations, and lots of spoilers. Discretion is advised.
In the criminal justice system, cinematic-based offenses are considered especially heinous. The dedicated attorneys who investigate these villainous films are members of an elite squad known as the Reels of Justice. These are their stories.
Order, please, order. The Reels of Justice is now in session. Judge Big Ben Haslar is presiding. All eyes for the Honorable Judge Haslar. Be seated. Welcome to the Reels of Justice. Today we are hearing the case of The People versus Melancholia, a 2011 Lars von Trier film about two sisters, one of whom is battling chronic depression and a recently failed marriage, both living under the imminent threat of a rogue planet set to collide with Earth.
Whoa.
For those of you unfamiliar with our court proceedings, we are here to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. As always, films are to be considered excellent until proven awful, and the burden of proof lies upon the prosecution, that's you, Mr. Schlender, to prove beyond the shadow of a reasonable doubt that the film is guilty. You may begin your opening statement.
Thank you, Your Honor. Lars von Trier, the most exhausting filmmaker to ever be featured on Reels of Justice, makes a comeback.
He's back.
I'm for the defense, but I agree with that.
Melancholia is no doubt in the von Trier aesthetic. It has an unrelenting cynicism, a lack of joy, and no shortage of self-adulation. When von Trier says he is probably, quote, "I am probably the most self-satisfied director you will ever meet," we are best to believe him. In this case, we will see a movie that ultimately lacks substance, and we will see once you remove the thin veneer that is von Trier, we are left with nothing. Von Trier made this movie for himself. He has said he does not even like it, and the audience is once again treated to that rock in the face that only leaves us asking, so what? I am in accord with von Trier when he said, the only redeeming factor about this movie, you might say, is that the world ends. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schlender. Appearing on behalf of the defense is Mr. Josh Weilerstein. Please present your opening statement.
He's the doctor, not the monster.
So I saw this movie when it came out, and I remember my wife taking me to see it, saying she had to know what I thought of it. And I walked out of the theater in a total daze. We wandered the streets of Lower Manhattan for an hour. I could barely speak. And I don't know what it was that made me fall in love with this movie so much, because normally this kind of aesthetic, I do hate it. But I have absolutely, I loved it so much. And I also decided that I would never watch it again. And thanks to you, Dylan, I've gone back on that stance and had to watch this.
Fantastic.
So the first thing that I love about this movie, because I'm a classical musician, is the Wagner. There's this, the Prelude, Tristan and Isolde, is the only music in the whole movie, and that appears, I counted when I watched it yesterday, 11 times in the movie. And for me, I found that I always hated Wagner, and I finally found out how to like Wagner, because from the first notes of the piece and the movie, I finally felt like the inhumanly beautiful music of Wagner finally had a topic that could match him, which was the end of the world. And I can absolutely anticipate critics of this movie finding it unbelievably pretentious, and it is, as all of von Trier's movies are, but I just found it incredibly beautiful. And for me, the use of the Wagner made the entire thing. That the Wagner Tristan is about this obsessive kind of like apocalyptic love, which is kind of what happens in this movie, as Kirsten Dunst essentially falls in love with this star that is going to destroy the world. And just the imagery of the first 5 minutes is enough for me to just put me right back into falling in love with this movie all over again. And it walks right up to the line and walks on the line of being overly pretentious. But I disagree. I think it's not a cynical movie. I think it's actually an incredibly powerful kind of optimism to it, very weirdly, since the world ends. But there's something quite beautiful about the end to me. And that's
all
my
right.
statement.
Thank you, Mr. Weilerstein. Prosecution, you may begin with your first exhibit.
I'd like to file a motion that Josh can't use his superior knowledge of classical music against me in this case.
I object.
The motion is denied.
Oh, well, there goes my case. Okay, so let me get started here. The film itself is bifurcated. Part 1 is the first part, and Part 2 is the actual movie.
Oh.
That's right. Part 1 is literally half of the movie, and what Part 1 is, let me explain. It is a big wedding scene, and it's a little redolent of the wedding scene in Deer Hunter, and it suffers some of the same shortcomings that Deer Hunter also did, which is to say it's largely, entirely pointless.
Academy Award-winning Deer Hunter?
Yes, and a lot of people criticize the wedding scene for being overly long to establish such a simple point, and that is something that we see in this Melancholia feature, which is this wedding scene establishes that Kirsten Dunst is depressed. I mean, we're not just talking depressed; we're talking so depressed that everyone is so worried about her. But wait 1 minute, how does this young woman get through life being this depressed? Is everyone just always shoving her along? Is she medicated? Is she getting therapy? How is she able to have a relationship with this Skarsgård fellow that doesn't completely fall apart before the marriage?
Wait a minute. I have an objection to this. I think
Sure.
Yes.
so. I think the thing I should have mentioned in my opening statement is that I think it's one of the most and I've been extremely lucky to never suffer from depression, but I've read about this now that apparently it's one of the most accurate depictions of depression that exists in film, and it comes from his own experience of depression. As you said, everything about Von Trier is about everything in a Von Trier movie is about him. So absolutely true. But I think there's something very powerful in that first part, which is so long and so awkward, but it actually makes you feel like she is kind of pushing herself through this whole experience, but it just keeps falling apart. Which I found that it's excruciating, but I think it's sort of supposed to be.
It's excruciating, and you could say it's supposed to be, but that is a cop-out, because we have to understand this movie is 2 hours and 5 minutes, and you have to remember the whole beginning, the slow-motion vignettes that we saw, a technique that he would use to much better effect in the house that Jack built some years later. We see the whole movie play out, so we already know everything that is going to happen. So the fact that we have to spend so much time in this bizarre wedding scene where we are treated to Kirsten Dunst actually peeing on camera. I mean, what is this? What is this? What are you doing, Mr. Von Trier? How dare you?
Acting,
My goodness.
acting.
Object to him, Josh. Object to that.
Yeah, so
Please defend the urination on the golf course. I would love to hear this.
I don't want to defend that. I mean, look, I think it's just her behavior is just unbelievably self-destructive. But I think there's something I found it like David Lynchian kind of surreal thing going on where what I found so funny and this very almost this black comedy kind of way is that the guests at the wedding don't seem to have any clue that the bride is acting totally bizarrely and is leaving for hours and taking a bath and having sex with one of the guests, and all of this kind of thing. I think there's something.
All right, objection to the objection. She doesn't have sex with him. She forces herself upon him.
This is
that
true.
That is pretty much rape.
No, it's true. You're right. I agree with that. It's true. Yeah, but I think there's something about I think he wants to bring you into a world where you are almost furious with her and furious with her family for not understanding her situation, furious with her for not being able to handle things. And there's this, I think he brings you into the experience of what it's like to be around somebody who is that deep in depression. I agree with you. I wrote down, does she take medication? How has her life gone through, up until this point? But in a way, I just feel Von Trier is just his world is his world and I don't challenge it. But I agree that that's also, I'm giving him a little bit of credit in that.
Well, you would have to, or we wouldn't have a show. If you agreed with me, we'd have no place to go.
Yeah.
But see, so what's frustrating, though, is that Von Trier just seems to have such a shallow understanding of depression, right? It's like a child eager to explain their newfound fascination with trains, but they're incapable of explaining how a coal fire engine works. They just know trains are neat. Lars knows depression is not fun. That's why we get smack dab in the middle of this life that someone with depression of her scale and magnitude would never have gotten this far in her life. She never would have gotten to this point, it seems. And one of the characters who kind of understands this but is never fully explored would be Kiefer Sutherland as the brother-in-law. Now, this could have been a very interesting, like Stanley Kowalski from the Streetcar Named Desire kind of analog. But Von Trier lacks I would say the ambition, possibly the knowledge to really explore and make that connection. So instead we just see Kiefer Sutherland just grumbling about everything the whole time until he ultimately kills himself. There's there's no fundamental connection between any character and Dunst that the audience can really latch onto to pick up on these things.
I don't think that's true, because I think there's something that is that I mean, again, I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt, but I think it's intentional that Kiefer Sutherland's character doesn't understand the depression that Justine is suffering from. The sister Claire kind of does, but she also, I think she twice says, like, sometimes I hate you so much, but like she gets it, but also can't get it. So I was just looking up something that I read this morning from the BBC about this movie, and I just wanted to read it because I think there's something. You said a couple times that it's like a child's view of depression, but actually it seems from a lot of people who've actually suffered from it that there's quite a bit of accuracy to it. So let me just read this. She said, someone for whom its exploration of depression resonated is journalist and project manager Julie. Now in her mid-20s, she saw Melancholia and casually enjoyed it as a teenager, but was retroactively awestruck by the parallels when she rewatched it in 2019. I was catatonic in the sense that everything that I was doing was completely removed from reality to me. It was a very dreamlike state. Whenever I could, I would go back to sleeping or a sort of cocoon. What also stands out for Julie are Justine's moments of impulsiveness. So, like and Kirsten Dunst apparently also suffered from depression a few years before she made this movie. And I do think there's I think the actions she takes in the first part are extreme, but they're also, I think they are based in some sort of reality.
A reality that involves a rogue planet about to crash into the Earth, because then we have that juxtaposition, which is, I'm going to move on to that next point, Your Honor.
Brilliant segue, sir. Brilliant.
Thank you. So, like I said, part 2 is the actual movie, right? The failings of the wedding we'll let the jury agree with me on later. So, what happens is we have a planet that is actually called Melancholia, mind you, because Lars does indeed think you are too stupid to make this connection. So he really wants to make sure that you idiots out there in the audience know what he's talking about, right?
Me?
Yeah, well, not you, Maynard. Dumb people. So anyway, the guys like me, it's a good thing he said it, or I wouldn't have a case. I would have been like, what the heck's this movie about, right? No. So we actually have this huge symbolism of depression about to literally destroy the world, and it's a bizarre juxtaposition after everything we saw in part 1 versus what we see in part 2, and we see Kirsten Dunst still being very depressed and being very flat. We see Kiefer Sutherland end up killing himself after he realizes that the planet is indeed going to collide with Earth, but it doesn't happen in a way that feels organic. Everything we've seen about Kiefer Sutherland's character up till his suicide would lead us to believe that A, he would probably take the family with him, or B, he just wouldn't actually give up hope. And maybe it would be like a naive optimism, like, it's going to work. And like up until the planet, spoilers, we have a spoiler warning at the beginning of the show. Melancholia does crash into Earth and destroy Earth flat out, and everyone dies. So Kiefer Sutherland's character seems like the kind of guy who would have either have murdered, suicide his whole family, or he would have just had this naive optimism that everything would work out anyway, and as the planet's hitting, he still would have been believing it was going to work.
I don't know about that, because I think there's that moment where the flyby happens and he gives the toast like to life, and Claire's like, why did you do that? And he said, well, I wasn't, scientists can get things wrong.
Agreed. I'll stipulate to that. I kind of chuckled too. All right. So that was the juxtaposition versus part 2. And another thing I want to talk about, again, is kind of rolling back to Von Trier himself. And one of the things that just constantly bugs about Lars is not only how selfish he is in his movie making, but the fact is that we actually see so many of these ideas explored in other places and explored better. Like I said, the Kiefer Sutherland Stanley Kowalski connection. But even just looking at the lead actress, Kirsten Dunst, she actually did this look at depression, and it probably did it better in Virgin Suicides, which came out in 1999, almost a decade plus before this movie. So it's like Lars is discovering all these new things, and they're new to him, but he thinks none of us get it, or no one's ever talked about it before, and it just makes for a boring movie where we're like, well, who cares, Lars? I'm so glad you figured this out and you're working through your depression, but it's really not our problem, and stop trying to throw all of this on us.
Okay, well, I just think that there is a sense that he's throwing it all on us. I agree with that, but I think the thing that you might be missing about it is that is the way that Justine begins to accept, or always has accepted, that the planet is going to hit the Earth, and she knows things, and it's going to happen. And she becomes the one who accepts everything, while her sister, who is filled with anxiety. And I think that's the other part of this movie, is that the first part is about depression, the second part is about anxiety. And I think the fact that Claire cannot control her completely understandable anxiety that everyone in her life is, and including her, is about to get killed. There and Justine is so calm. She also calms her nephew, Leo, I think is his name, down at the end of the movie, and they build the cave, the magic cave, to protect them from the planet. I found that an incredible juxtaposition, actually, between the two, and then her calm as the planet is hitting, as the Wagner is just going wild. To me, it's like, it was in the theater, it was an overwhelming experience for me.
Well, I think that gets to one of the fundamental misunderstandings about depression that we were talking about before, is this idea that someone who has extreme melancholia, as it were, like Kirsten Dunst's Justine character, is inherently better equipped to handle these kinds of situations because they think everything is going to turn out bad anyway. Now, granted, yes, this does work in a very narrow situation where a planet is going to destroy everything on Earth. In real life, this isn't really a transferable skill or something that we should be promoting, like saying, hey, depressed people, it turns out you're doing it right. It's like, no, if you say, oh, everything doesn't matter anyway, and you stop going to work, you're going to get fired. You say, oh, everything doesn't matter, and you stop taking care of your kid's going to get taken away. There are actual consequences to having untreated depression that this movie chooses in a weird way to celebrate, instead of make a comment on, saying like, no, she needed help. She needed help. And the fact that the planet's ending should have been an expression of love and how we have to help each other. But instead, it's a bizarre celebration of like Lars thinking like, hey, I can handle the world ending and you can't. Nana, nana, boo, boo. I rest my case.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Schlender. Mr. Weilerstein, you may present your case.
So I think that this movie is actually really profound about depression and anxiety, though I will agree that I don't know if it would be made the same way now, when mental health is such a prominent part of mainstream culture. I mean, we just had the situation with Naomi Osaka with the French Open. I think there is a better understanding of depression now than there even was 10 years ago. And I agree with you in the sense that there is a slight bit of celebration that she's the one who can handle it. Now, I just was finding the inspiration in the movie apparently came from von Trier. He was experiencing a bout of depression. He went to a therapist, and the therapist said that depressives and melancholics act more calmly in violent situations, while ordinary and happy people are more apt to panic. And that's what the inspiration in the movie was. Now, I also think that that's a little bit simplistic. Obviously, there's different things about this, but for me, the first thing that I loved about this movie was, I usually hate awkward things. Like, I barely can rewatch The Office because I find it too awkward, especially the Scott Potts episode with the computers. I can't watch it.
That one's rough.
Yeah, it's just too much for me. I can't do it. But this movie, I feel like you're just watching this sort of breakdown of this woman's life. And there was another thing that I was reading about this movie, again from people who were quoted, who had gone through depression. She said, just give me one moment. Yeah, the thing that I found so profound about the first part is, yes, Justine was acting self-destructively. She was depressive, but also partly what I mentioned, the guests don't even seem to notice. And then her family is so screwed up. I mean, her mother is like a sociopath. Her father is super eccentric and seemingly much more interested in just flirting with these two women named Betty. This is why I thought it was like David Lynch. I felt like I was watching like Mulholland Drive meets Blue Velvet a little bit. And then when Kiefer Sutherland's character says, why does she have to behave like this? And then I found this quote from a woman who went through depression who said, somebody asked me, well, why are you feeling like this? I couldn't put my finger on it. There wasn't something like, my parents had died. It settled on me like this cloud from out of nowhere. The film really understands that. She seems quite a privileged person. She's got this incredible wedding. She's marrying this gorgeous guy who, for the most part, is understanding and clearly loves her, which I thought was another very interesting part of this. She's got a good job. She's got all these things going on, but none of that matters. Nothing touches it. You can't make a dent in it. So for me, like the beginning of the movie with the limo not being able to get there, like she finds that funny in a sort of nihilistic way, like, oh, now I'm going to be 2 hours late to my wedding, which I never wanted. So I found that a beautiful aspect of the movie.
You think she never wanted the wedding? Or she never wanted the party?
I think she convinced herself that she wanted the party, and then as soon as she got there or that limo was going, she was like, oh my God, this is exactly the opposite of what I wanted.
If I could address one point, Your Honor, that Josh brought up about the family, the eccentric father, the sociopathic mother, and then, of course, the other sister, Justine's sister with the anxiety, is I feel this is also a missed opportunity on Von Trier's part. I thought the mother proved to be a very interesting character that we did not get to explore, and we don't really get to see her through a different prism. We get to see her through Kiefer Sutherland having complete contempt for her throwing the baggage out. Yeah. We don't really get the connection from Justine to her mother, which I thought would have been something worth exploring, because there could be a very genetic component to some of this mental illness that we see exhibited throughout this whole family, from the father's side, from the mother's side. When the mom says, any ambition you got, you didn't get from your father. So I feel that was a huge missed opportunity. The mom would have been a very interesting character to explore more. Maybe not the father so much, but if we want this to be taken seriously as a meditation on mental health issues, well, I think it was incumbent on Lars to take it seriously as a meditation on mental health issues. And he misses the mark by spending so much time in the wedding and not bringing these more interesting characters to light, even if it's just through the prism of Justine. So I think that was a huge swing and a miss, if he swung at all. If he's even playing baseball, I think he might even just be sitting in the bleachers.
He's playing Lars von Trier ball, sir. You don't understand.
He is playing Lars von Trier. You're right, Your Honor. That's the quote. My goodness.
I think that it's interesting to me because I give him the benefit of the doubt that we go into his world. The fact that everybody's alone, you don't see anybody else there. It's just they're off in this castle, which I know in real life is in Sweden, but we don't know where it is. Everybody in this show is American. In the movie is American, so you assume maybe it's in the US somewhere. But so I think what happens is that you just get this sense of claustrophobia, even though it's this glorious, massive castle. And her loneliness. And I think that's why you get these single interactions with the mother where the mother says, get the hell out of here. The father just abandons her there. And even the husband, I mean, it's weird. It's all weird. Like the husband just leaves and says things could have been different. And you're just sort of supposed to assume that she got divorced, I guess. I don't know. But to me, like there's a sense of like reality being bent from her perspective. And like what we see is everything she sees. I think that maybe, I'm thinking of this out loud. That's why the guests don't react to her, because she doesn't even see the guests as real people. It's all just her brother-in-law who is a jerk to her. Sorry, I don't know if I can swear.
Please fucking do.
No, you're
Please
allowed.
fucking
do. So her brother-in-law is a total asshole. Her sister is deeply misunderstanding what her own sister is going through. The father is just totally off in his own world. The mother is I think that there's this sense of like, you get this one snapshot of how Justine feels her family has been her whole life. And that to me is what makes it so profound.
See, the way you're describing it is interesting, but what the viewers or the listeners at home need to understand that this was an hour and 15 minutes,
Sure.
and these are like 2 points that aren't even fleshed out that great, and then ultimately have no bearing on the second half of the movie.
But I don't think so. I think it does have a bearing in the second half. So I can go to move to the second half. Thank you for the segue.
There you go.
I think that the total isolation and claustrophobia of that first part, and then to begin the second part with her in the completely catatonic state where they literally have to essentially carry her into her room and try to get her
sponge baths.
Sorry?
Give her sponge baths.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but actually I read another article about this where a woman was saying the scene where she could not lift her leg to get into the bathtub was like, made her, this person watching, break down, because it was something that was so close to her experience where the simplest tasks were impossible. And but
we're supposed to believe this is the same woman who bagged a handsome husband who was going to be promoted to an art director at an advertising company. I mean, that's where some of this disconnect comes from. People who have depression that bad have so much trouble functioning in society like that. It's so
but I think
incredulous for us to believe.
But I think that's, to me, like, based on, in 2011, I think, yes. And now I feel like we do know about people who are very high functioning in certain situations. And also, you know, medication can help, and that people can go up and down and have incredible lows. There's a sort of, I mean, again, I'm no doctor. I don't know. There is a sort of manic depressive aspect, I think, to the film as well, which doesn't get explored. And what I was going to say before is I don't think there's anything scientific that's explored. I've read that the way the planet hits has absolutely nothing to do with how a planet impact with the Earth would ever be like. And
I'm glad you researched that.
Yeah, I did.
Could this
We
happen?
need to get Neil deGrasse Tyson in as our expert witness here.
Yeah, right.
Again?
I was exactly.
We'll get friend of the show Isaac Arthur to do an episode for us.
Well,
There we go.
so to me, like, and the way they, like, even Claire researches, like, you know, you can tell it's like an old computer, and like everything is very, like, kind of not working very well. And I get the sense that it sort of takes place in this sort of liminal space where there's no time either. And so, like, to me, that I'm getting a little bit lost in what I was trying to say.
Welcome to my world.
To me, that sort of catatonic behavior that comes just after she's like smiling at the wedding, like, that made sense to me from like what we know now about depression. But
And she drank a prodigious amount of alcohol.
Very true.
One line solves all these problems. Oh my God, she's not taking her medication. Bam, there you go. I fixed your movie, Mr. Von Trier. You could cut an hour out.
and make it an hour 15.
I did write.
Why not? Now that would
notes,
be subversive.
In my notes, I did write, "Why don't they call a doctor?" But you know, I think that's. But to me, that's like how just screwed up the whole universe where this movie exists is so screwed up. And so then in the second part, what I first of all I found, and the one thing we haven't talked about at all is the cinematography, which I found stunning throughout. Partly because there are parts of it that look almost like cheap CGI, but it wasn't cheap CGI. Like I was watching a little bit about how they filmed it. And to me, it was such an incredibly beautiful looking movie that you get a little bit wrapped up in this, and you kind of fall in love again with like the earth and the rain and the hail and the way the weather sort of reacts and the horses react to this planet. Like, I found that stunning throughout the whole thing, and how Justine, as it starts to become clear that the planet is going to hit the earth, that she begins to come to terms with that and sort of become part of nature. It is very obvious. It's extremely hit you over the head with it. It's not subtle at all. You know, when she's lying in the light of the planet naked, you know, there's something obvious. It's so, you know, it's sort of like symbolism in the middle.
I like that scene.
But, you know, I have to say that's how Wagner is, and how Wagner's music is. You know, I think I was reading that he said, you know, he was reading Marcel Proust about the Tristan and Isolde, which Proust thought was the greatest piece of music written in the whole 19th century. And so it's sort of the pinnacle of German Romanticism, which is also what this movie has a lot of that aesthetic in it. And so to me, it's like this sort of surreal, incredibly megalomaniac vision of what the world looks like. Wagner was exactly like this. Like, to me, it was like von Trier trying to be Wagner. And for me, like, Wagner has those moments where I'm like swooning and falling in love, and then other moments where I'm like, I've had enough of this. And for me, I got right up to that point where I had enough, but it was like right at the perfect point.
Okay. And are you resting your case on that, or do you have more points?
Oh yeah, I have one more point that is very nerdy about the music part of it. Sorry, I keep bringing up Wagner, but you brought a class.
You got to stay on brand.
Yeah, I got So the thing about the beginning of Tristan and Isolde, the prelude, which is all he uses in the movie, is that it starts and then has these moments of silence. And for me, knowing the Wagner, I kept waiting for the next phrase of the music. But for people who don't know that prelude, which is probably 95% of the people watching the movie, it sounds like music starts and stops, and then it starts and stops. And the expressive marking at the beginning of that prelude is langsam im Schmachten, slow and languishing. And I got that sense when she is speaking, when Justine is speaking, that's how, she'll do this thing. And Kirsten Dunst is such an amazing actress. She would start to speak, and then she would she would look like she was starting to speak, and then she'd pause for like 5 seconds, and then she would talk again. And that's what the Wagner does. And then finally it sort of just opens up. And every time it opened up, like the camera would go to like the sky and to the planet. And so for me, like, that was like this amazing filmmaking kind of connection where I felt like he really understood the Wagner. And from a classical music perspective, often film directors don't seem to understand the music that they're using. So I loved that part of it.
You know who else understood Wagner? No, I'm not going to make that joke. Anyway, as you may or may not know, famous music critic Alex Ross actually wrote an entire book about Wagner called Wagnerism. Wagnerism. And one of the things he mentions in this 700-page book, which I read yesterday, just so the court knows, so I really know what I'm talking about here.
Are you an Android, sir?
Yeah. Of course, if you want to hear a more condensed version of it, there's a podcast where someone interviews him. I forget the name. Anyway.
Who is that?
Maybe at the end we'll figure it out. Yeah. But anyway, but there's this idea with Wagner, right, is that people see in him what they want to see. And what worries me about von Trier is when you have someone as monumental as Wagner, von Trier sees so much of himself in there, and there's so much bad in von Trier now that he is projecting it onto Wagner, and that he's taking out of him as well. And that is what we see in this movie. That's why you have these scenes cutting on the beat, cutting away during those pauses that you're talking about. It is actually a quite vulgar exercise by his own admission. So he is deliberately disfiguring, but trying to celebrate this Wagner score. And it's very unpalatable. And it's when you watch that beginning with all those scenes happening, with, like you said, the huge bong of symbolism hitting you over the head, and when she's running in her wedding dress, but the roots are pulling her in because she's becoming one with the world and all of that stuff. I mean, that to me, that stuff. Well, I mean, if you watch the first 15 minutes of the movie, I mean, she's standing there with dead birds falling around her, like Josh said. It's very German, so I will give him that. But what it presents on the screen, I would argue, is a disfigurement of what Wagner's score has to offer. Because you're right, it is sweeping, grand, mythical. It has majesty. But he is only seeing the darkness in it, and I think that's a disservice.
So this is the last point I'll make before I rest my case. I think that this is the fundamental misunderstanding here, because the end of Tristan and Isolde is the most ecstatic thing in the whole world, and it's the Isolde, the love death, Liebestod. She sings her death, and it's the most. And this is coming from somebody, by the way. I am not a lover of Wagner's music, but the prelude and Liebestod of Tristan, to me, it's like crack. You can't resist it. It's beyond a musical crack, I should say. And it's so powerful, the ecstasy of that ending. And to me, the end of Melancholia is meant to be ecstatic. It's the end of the world to Justine is an ecstatic, obsessive moment. And to me, that's why the Wagner is so powerful. Now, there is the real connection, obviously, with the insane comments that Lars von Trier made at that Cannes festival about being a Nazi, which I'm just going to say, I hope he was joking and all of that. But Wagner, obviously was a horrible anti-Semite and did, some of his ideas did influence the Nazis, though that wasn't really his fault since he was dead for many years. Now, Alex Ross did say the use of the Wagner was perverse in the movie, and it is. But Wagner's music is perverse in my mind. So it all kind of works on like this one level of these two egomaniacs kind of working together to create this incredible scene for us.
No, that is definitely one way to look at it. I think we'll have to let the jury decide, but they'll probably lean your way.
All right. Well, both sides have rested their cases. The attorneys will now present their closing arguments. Mr. Schlender, you may begin.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, von Trier makes movies for himself. Maybe there is something noble to that. I just wish we could see it. Ultimately, von Trier's problems are not ours. His failings are his own. His vain struggle to hold his audience accountable just results in him holding them in contempt. We have a movie that has a whole half of it devoted to a bizarre, unnecessary wedding scene, the likes of which we have not seen in any movie, and for good reason, because we don't need it to tell the story about how depression can get you through the Earth being blown up by a giant rogue planet. So let us all say to Lars, knock it off. And you know what, Lars? I dare you to make a Terminator movie or Star Wars or anything that is not born from that cesspool you call a mind. It is just tiresome. It is pat. And the movie viewing public deserves better than the musings of a miserable little man. Unless that miserable little man is me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schlender. Mr. Weilerstein, your closing argument, please.
So I didn't write a wonderful speech like that. So this will be a little bit from the top of my head. I think actually this discussion, this argument has really clarified for me what I loved about this movie, which is that I find it especially in a world that right now is extremely cynical for a lot of good reasons. I find the juxtaposition of the end of the world being an ecstatic event as quite profound. I find that the meditation for me about depression and anxiety, which is something that I, again, have been very lucky not to experience, but from what I understand from my reading about this movie and about depression and anxiety and having friends who have suffered from it, is that it is an unbelievably accurate and very uncomfortable depiction, intentionally uncomfortable depiction of depression and anxiety in a way that makes you want to scream. And I think that that's exactly what von Trier was going for. Now, I do agree that there is a sense of pretension and symbolism that is probably one of the least subtle that you could imagine, but I think that is overcome by I don't even think the movie has a message. I think that the movie, this is as Dylan said, this is Lars von Trier's story. It's Justine's story. It's Claire's story. And I've heard Lars von Trier say that it could be seen as the same person as well. And you get the sense of this little world that they live in on Earth being destroyed, and their sort of torn apart reactions to it. One being calm, one being accepting, one being almost overjoyed about it, and one being completely unaccepting and terrified. And to me, one doesn't need to choose between the two. There's a real sense that they are all part. These things are all part of all of us. And so I just found it a profound movie that to me is, again, one of the more overwhelming experiences I've ever had in a movie theater.
Okay, well, thank you both. Members of the jury, Mr. Robb Maynard, Mr. Big Ben Haslar, and Mr. Oh, that's mean. I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
Mr.
Yeah,
has never
Ben.
publicly urinated Ryan Luis Rodriguez. You have all heard the facts concerning this case. It is now up to you to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. The bailiff will escort you to the deliberation room to render your verdict. I cannot remember the last time I laid a boot naked under the night sky.
Whoever came up with that nickname, fuck you.
It was Dylan.
Oh, no, it was not. Come on. Right before the deliberation.
I just don't know since when we skip Brian's nicknames just because they're mean. Okay, interesting. This film was interesting, and the trial, and I think I came in with one idea in mind, and then I think the trial actually gave me a lot to think about. So I'm unsure of which way I'm leaning at this point, but I'd like to hear from Ryan.
So, am I the only one in this jury who actually liked the movie?
I did not like it when I watched it. The court actually is swaying me a bit because it wasn't on my level. But when I watched it the first time, I absolutely hated it.
I hated the first half. Like, and during the first half, I wasn't having a good time. I did like the second half, although I thought it was pretty overwrought.
Okay, interesting. I think that this movie, as the defense pointed out, I think it's a very accurate depiction of depression. I mean, I have bipolar, and I saw myself in both of the characters in a way that made me very uncomfortable, which is good. That means it's transgressive. But yeah, I mean, it's really, I'm not going to say, well, if you didn't understand it, then that's on you, because that's really not fair to put on an audience member. But I do think that even though the film doesn't seem to have answers, I think that it does raise a lot of things that need to be spoken about.
I think that's fair. I think he crafted it in a way where it's not trying to teach you about depression or anything like that, just more of an artistic extension of his own. So that part didn't bug me as far as the high functioning matter that the prosecution brought up.
I didn't think that the portrayal of depression by Justine was inaccurate. What I felt was inaccurate was everyone's response to her around her, right? This is someone who suffered with depression, and the film establishes a history of it. So instantly I'm thinking there's no way Kiefer Sutherland is paying for this huge wedding that he can basically guarantee is going to go wrong. There's no way that all these people who are frequently acquainted with this woman aren't aware of when she disappears for a couple hours what's going on. And I can understand holding down a job with depression. It seems like this job has a particular huge amount of stress that I think and with the kind of shittiness of her boss, who seems like he has zero tolerance for anything and is quick to fire and punish, would have done exactly that after one or two episodes of hers. So this may be a very accurate depiction of depression. I don't think it's an accurate depiction of how people respond to people with depression, even if they're family members.
Well, I mean, there is a certain level of, if you don't have the same afflictions, then you're not exactly judging it properly, or you don't have the proper frame of reference. But I guess I can't totally disagree with that interpretation of it. I mean, I do disagree, but I don't think that I could raise a good case as to why I disagree.
Yeah, the husband, I guess, Alexander Skarsgård, he must know how her bad days go, and yet here she is having a bad day. It does happen to be the wedding day, and he leaves at just kind of a drop of the hat. He just leaves. It's like you've been dating this woman certainly for a few years. You, as she said, you had to kind of know how this was gonna go. And yet, as soon as she does exactly what you'd expect her to do, he leaves.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that serves her arc, basically, is that she had a support system around her, even if the support system was not exactly helping her. She had all these things, but at the end of the day, who she is deep down, she's going to be alone because of that. And I think that it's supposed to kind of feel like a nightmare, like it's closing around you. Like, I've had several stress dreams that are just like this, where you have people around you that supposedly understand you and supposedly know your lowest moments, yet they end up abandoning you no matter what. And I think that her arc in the movie is that when she finally comes to terms with who she is and kind of what she has in her kind of biological makeup, that she'll end up probably being alone.
I was actually unsure of, when we hit part 2, whether part 1 had actually even happened or whether it had been a dream.
Yeah, I thought it was a prequel to the thing at first, and then gradually realized, oh no, this takes place afterwards.
Yeah, as if she'd had this delusion that she could have this wedding day that all fell apart, almost like a stress dream, like you described it. Anyway, so that's how I did feel about part one. Part two, I liked a lot more.
This is where it loses me.
Really, I liked part two because it's kind of that sci-fi B movie trope of a planet's going to hit a planet. But
her motivation of like, okay, the Earth is going to be destroyed, so that's like the only thing that makes her feel better. I mean, that's almost like supervillain logic, or motivation.
I can't say it's how I would feel personally, but I believed that she believed it. It felt believable from the character. For me, I couldn't really resonate with anyone in the second half. I thought that the other sister, was it Claire?
Yeah.
I thought she was like way too high strung. It's like, if a planet's going to hit the planet, we're all screwed. Like, I just couldn't see stress in that. Everybody's going to die. So what's the point in worrying?
That's the manic depression. That is getting to, basically your reaction in a stressful situation is to just get more stressed.
Yeah. Whereas I think a planet hitting, Earth, that's the way I want to go, have everybody come with me. 'Cause I've got FOMO real bad. And I don't want anything cool to happen after I die.
You don't want to miss those flying cars and all that, that Blade Runner world that is coming.
Exactly. I feel a lot better if I know there's just nothing after that.
You just want the neon in the rain.
Yeah. The music, though, Josh had great points about the music, because I didn't understand really the subtleties of the music.
No,
I knew it was important. I could feel it was
part of the 95%.
but I didn't know exactly its history, and him talking about how Justine's speech pattern kind of matched that, I thought was really great. One thing that did bother me, I don't know if it bothered anyone else, John Hurt, her father's English. Charlotte Rumpling, her mother is English. Her sister is English.
It bothers me now.
they all have English accents, and here's Kirsten Dunst just sort of chewing out and stupid American accent, and I'm like, when did this
accents
family
skip a generation?
They sent her as a child to San Diego to live by herself, so that's why
something like
has
that.
An American accent.
Is that true?
No.
Okay, that's what I'm saying.
It doesn't.
It bothered me the whole time, and then I think it was Josh who said, "Well, they're all American." I'm like, they're not actually. Anyway, let's start coming down on verdicts.
Right.
I didn't like this movie initially because I really did think the first hour was kind of a waste of time, because I didn't think I needed that whole hour to understand that she was depressed. I feel like a shorter version of that wedding scene would have taught me that, or an extended version of her moping around her sister's place in part two would have driven this home to me.
Well, I think it's supposed to be inescapable, that you feel like you can't win this situation, much like she can't. And the longer that it goes, I think the longer that you begin to accept and understand kind of her catatonic state in the second half.
Okay, well, I'm going to put you on the hot seat. Ryan, what's your verdict?
I'm going not guilty. 1,000%.
1,000. Wow, that's pretty strong. You want to elaborate on what specifically drove you to that?
Well, I mean, it's a movie that I can see myself in, which is not something that happens very often, and I think that it was, especially for Von Trier, who's a total brat. I think this is, I mean, of the two movies I've seen of his, this is the most human. This is no The House That Jack Built. This is I think actually compassionate for the people in it.
Well, see, I like to House Jack Built, but so far I'm seeing that Von Trier likes to take like B movie concepts and then try to high art them, right? Which
I'm 100% in favor of.
Hey, I like B movies. Big Ben, what have you got?
Well, like I said, I thought this movie was guilty. I didn't think there was anything that could sway me. The last half just killed it for me. But through this courtroom, it's one of the occasions where the argument from the defense pretty much swayed me on that. Not that I personally am all the way up to 1,000% on it, but there is value there, especially with the Wagner artistry in it. And I think the first half really doesn't do a terrible job of like illustrating depression, even though its goal isn't to teach about it. So from that perspective, I'm not guilty, but more like 60%.
All right. No, good. I know it doesn't matter for me, but like you, I think I came in after seeing the film kind of not liking it, but then hearing the arguments from the defense and having my mind sort of swayed. I still think Lars von Trier is a pretentious douchebag,
Sustained.
and so, but I won't hold the film guilty of that. But I do think he's a real pessimistic jerk who's just like, I'm not feeling good today, so everyone should die. Um, but Kirsten Dunst is actually pretty great. Her name is Kirsten too, so the prosecution knows. And so yeah, I'm also gonna go not guilty, not 1,000%, but just eased out. The music was really great, so, and it was a pretty movie. So not guilty. Let's go tell that very handsome judge.
Mr. Foreman, have you reached your verdict?
We have, Your Honor. In the case of The People versus Melancholia, we find the defendant not guilty of being a bad movie.
Ooh,
All right. The verdict is so rendered. Dylan Schlender is hereby sentenced to strip down beneath the night sky and bask in the knowledge that the earth is evil and our existence pointless. Court is adjourned.
I just call that Thursday, baby.
This is Amanda Hug and Kiss of the Gabagoo Gazette reporting to you live from outside the Reels of Justice. Dylan J. Schlender, would you care to share your thoughts on the jury's verdict?
Well, Amanda, what can I say? Lars von Trier. This guy is going to be the death of me, and then he's going to make a movie about how it's all about him. So, there you go. It was a great case, though. I still believe in the Reels of Justice, and I thought we had a lot of very, very good points that came up in this case. So, it was well argued, and I tip my hat to the opposing counselor and bid you all adieu.
And here comes Josh Weilerstein. Excuse me, can we get a word on how you feel about today's verdict?
I'm very happy about it. I think I'm glad I was able to, I was listening by the door a little bit. I was able to convince some of the jury members to change their mind about this movie. But I also have to admit now that 90% of the points that Dylan made, I also agreed with, that it's a very pretentious movie. But I also, for some reason, I still love it anyway. And, I'm thrilled that it turned out my way.
Thank you very much. That's all we have from the courthouse today. Let's go back to the studio for post-trial analysis.
And here we are.
Lars von Trier.
Yeah, that guy. So, Josh, we did The House That Jack Built, another movie that he did, and I had to prosecute that. But I really liked The House That Jack Built. This one I thought I had more of a case to make, but at the end of the day, actually, I kind of really like this movie, too.
Did you see that one?
To be really honest, this is the only Lars von Trier movie I've ever seen, because the other ones have seemed so violent and so nihilistic that I haven't been into them.
This one wasn't nihilistic.
But that's, to me, that's the thing, that I didn't find it nihilistic. But I mean, it is on the reality level of the planet exploding. But but on the emotional level, I felt it's not nihilistic. But anyway. It's a movie that the reason I thought of bringing it up is to talk about on the show is because I thought it's such a polarizing movie, and there's people who are evangelists for it, and there are people who think it's total garbage. So, I think it's the perfect movie to discuss in this way.
Oh yeah. I think
it was a great
House
pick
that Jack Built, but it is very violent. You still
you could just listen to the episode.
Yeah, I will.
Yeah, but no, it's interesting that Von Trier's got this pretentious nature, but he basically keeps telling B-movie stories and just kind of dressing it up as art. And
he's got a good eye for it, too. The way it's shot, framed, I mean, all that stuff is just excellent.
He's good at composition.
Yes, composition is the word I'm looking for. He is. It's excellent.
He is good at that. So, Josh, what has been keeping you busy? What have you been up to lately?
So I've been traveling actually a lot, which has been amazing, because as for a musician, we didn't do very much during the pandemic. I wasn't able to conduct much at all, but just over the last couple of months, things are starting to open up around the world a little bit. I'm fully vaccinated, which has been a relief to travel that way. And so I was in Denmark, I was in the US, I was in Switzerland, I was in I can't even remember now. I was in France for a little while as well. So I've been kind of bouncing around, conducting and doing in the Netherlands as well, doing concerts that were for either an extremely tiny audience or just like recorded for the radio.
Oh, cool. And I know you've got a podcast too, right?
Yeah, it's actually how I met Dylan. It's called Sticky Notes, the classical music podcast. I started it about 4 years ago, basically thinking, that there was a real gap where podcasts were concerned in terms of classical music, because there were very few at the time, if any. I think there were these sort of little clips from symphonic orchestras that would like record the program notes from their concert that night. And so I thought, like a conductor doing real analysis of a piece and trying to bring it to a new audience would be really nice. And when I started it, I thought, I'd make 5 episodes and, my friends and family would pretend to listen to it. And now, like 4 years later, it's been downloaded like more than 2 million times. And, it's like a huge part of my life. So it's been a totally amazing experience to do it.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
No, it's great. And Josh, if I can offer you something, I loved your the Marriage of Figaro commentary one you
thanks.
did. I know you haven't done one like that before, and you were saying it was experimental, but you were looking for feedback on it. And I think you should do more like opera commentaries, because I found it to be very informative and a lot of fun to listen to.
Oh, great. Well, thanks. There's a sense with opera, like it's hard to do a podcast about it, especially when it's in a not in English, because nobody is understanding the text. So I was like, how do I translate while not talking over the music? And then I just thought like, I could do like a sort of like sportscaster thing where I just sort of like accompany the opera with like my reactions to it and just sort of like throw in the important line. So yeah, I mean, I did it with one of the Beethoven symphonies for this cycle I just did. And now I think I'm going to keep doing it with more operas.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
give me your Howard Cosell impression.
I can do the Marv Albert.
Hit me with the Marv Albert then.
Yes.
Perfect. You should definitely do the voiceover in one of them just like that.
I'll try that.
Oh, he's out on the side. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Very good. Very good.
Awesome.
We always ask our guests for a recommendation of a movie you think people should see. So what is a movie you think our listeners should check out?
So I guess in terms of like polarizing movies, a movie I saw during the pandemic, which didn't get that great reviews, but I thought was just incredible, was News of the World. It's a Tom Hanks movie. It also included this completely unknown 14-year-old German actress. Unfortunately, I don't remember her name.
Damn.
But I just found it a really touching movie. I don't know if it's because I was like locked inside my house for 4 months, but it had a kind of empathy to it that I found was really, really touching. I'm a huge sap for Tom Hanks movies anyway, so I just love those. But yeah, that's a movie that I would recommend, despite that it didn't get great reviews.
Oh yeah, no, well, sometimes critics are wrong.
Yeah,
we know that.
As a composer who I adore, Jean Sibelius once said, "No one ever built a statue to a critic."
And he's on Currency, so he would know.
Exactly.
No, I've been meaning to check that one out. I think if it comes streaming for free somewhere, I would definitely check that one out.
I think it's on Netflix.
Ooh, fantastic. Now I've got to put my money where my mouth is. God damn it. Dylan, what's your recommendation for this week?
Well, I had one planned out, but listening to Josh talk about how Melancholia affected him, like when he came out of the theater, just like kind of having that sense of awe. There has been a movie that's done that to me that's not all that dissimilar from Melancholia now that I'm thinking about it. So I'm going to recommend The Fountain by Darren Aronofsky. It came out in 2006 starring Hugh Jackman. And it's a story in 3 parts blended together, dealing with death, actually. That's what it's all about. And the titular fountain is called to the Fountain of Youth, but you get 3 different stories all wrapped into one. It was marketed terribly. They made it look like it was a time travel story, which it really isn't. And it's just a very profound meditation on death, acceptance, and moving on that I think everyone should watch. And it has a fantastic soundtrack on top of everything else.
Highly recommended.
Yeah, just an amazing movie.
Well,
That's a great recommendation. I'm definitely going to check that out.
You will not regret it. It is exceptional.
I have an 11-hour flight coming up on Monday, so I'm going to definitely download it to watch on that flight.
Hey, are you coming back stateside?
Yeah, I'm going to San Francisco. Actually,
Oh,
I don't know if you know, you guys are all movie buffs, so you probably do. You have this thing where if you watch movies on planes, it's a much more emotional experience.
I don't know. Like, if it gets to me through an air, like that tiny screen, I think, oh, well, if it manages to get to me through this postage stamp, it must be good, you know?
Because I watched Manchester by the Sea on a plane, and I was like a complete wreck for like the last 3 hours of the flight, like to the point where the flight attendant said, "Are you okay, sir?" You know, like,
Mommy, why is the man crying? Stay over here, honey.
I'm just feeling everything. I feel all of it.
I've never watched a movie on a plane that I hadn't seen before.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Oh, that's when I always watch the ones I never saw before.
Yeah, I'd never seen this, and I didn't know anything about it except that it was supposed to be great. And little did I know what it was about. And it was just, it was an intense experience. So just thought I'd bring that up.
I like to sleep on the plane because I don't do well with those, like the motion. So usually putting on a movie I've already seen will help me fall asleep. I'll go next. There's some great films about Earth colliding with other planets or getting hit by asteroids and such.
Excellent films.
But who would I be if I didn't recommend Toho's take on this? And so I'm going to recommend 1962's Gorath. It features Akira Kubo and is directed by Ishiro motherfucking Honda, so you already know it's a goddamn masterpiece. It tells the story of Earth's imminent destruction by an incoming planetoid named Gorath and the scientists who seek to prevent our annihilation. I won't give away the ending, but their plan involves oil drillers and Steve Buscemi, although perhaps I've said too much. If all you've seen of Toho or Japanese sci-fi are the kaiju flicks, I urge you to check this one out because it's a bit out of the box, but with a familiar feel, as it does feature a brief sequence with a walrus kaiju named Maguma, who the Toho executives basically insisted be included. It's not streaming anywhere, but there are certainly a few decent bootleg DVDs floating around out there, so happy hunting.
Is it on archive?
No, they took it off.
And yet Cowboy Bebop is a weeb choice.
Weeb requires anime. You can't be a weeb for Taku.
Debatable.
All right, I'm going to recommend Shadow, which is like Melancholia in that they both have scenes that look like gorgeous paintings. Shadow is a Chinese martial arts film by the same guy who gave us Hero and House of Flying Daggers, and his artistic eye is on full display here. Most every color except for flesh tones are desaturated to make it look like a Chinese ink painting. The story is fun. The action's almost comic book level of over the top, and every scene is just gorgeous. So if you didn't find umbrellas threatening before, you will after this film.
I did.
They're made of blades, people. It's awesome.
Penguins already made me afraid of umbrellas. So there's
and top hats.
Ryan, you're gonna send us on home?
Okay.
Here we go.
Lately, I've been moving away from recommending something on topic because it's fucking exhausting. So this week, I'll just recommend a film I just watched for the first time, one of the most strikingly photographed films I've ever beheld, Terrence Malick's Days of Heaven from 1978. Almost the entire film was shot during magic hour, which means that the production could shoot for maybe 20 minutes a day at most, and the final product justifies such a baller move. It is visual poetry, and you can find it on the Criterion Channel and Canopy. Support your local library.
Magic hour, is that like right before or after sunset or something?
Yes, as sunset is happening, basically.
Okay.
The crepuscular period, if you will.
Ew, please.
But that doesn't roll off the tongue.
Disgusting.
Hashtag crepuscular period.
That's what it is.
Yeah, well, why would they make such
I'm going to do that my next hashtag. I do like an Instagram of sunset.
Hashtag corpuscular. Why would they make such a disgusting word to describe something that's beautiful?
I
don't know.
I learned that word from we have 2 rabbits at home, and they're crepuscular, and I did not know that word until we had the rabbits. They come out at sunset.
I thought the rabbits had taught you the word.
yeah, they did. They
Josh, come close.
Also, bring me carrots.
Vocabulary. Anyway, with that, we are all out of show for the week, but we really want to thank our guest, Josh Weilerstein, for joining us. Or is it Weilerstein?
Weilerstein, and thank you for having me. I had a really great time.
We hope to have you back on the show very soon, and we hope everyone else will join us again as the reels of justice keep turning.
Count it.
Depression!
Oh.
Please follow us on Twitter at Reels of Justice, Instagram Reels of Justice, and Facebook.com/Reels of Justice.